So first things first, I'd just like to remind you that what's about to happen is a fan theory. None of this is canon unless Disney says it's canon. If anyone from Disney is listening, I would like to pay me consultation fees. I'll go ahead and discuss that with you. Otherwise, the rest of us can just kind of take what we enjoy from it, what helps us enjoy the story, and throw out the rest. We're going to have fun with it, hopefully, and you guys will grill me later. So, also, there may be spoilers for some Star Wars movies. I assume you knew that coming in. There won't be any for Solo because I haven't seen it yet. So, this is the new title, Star Wars: The Medium of Light. So, at school, I go to this Christian college, and I have a background in astrophysics, since no one else there does. And so, when they have these ideas, they come to me with stuff. And so, when I finally told them, hey, I finally saw The Last Jedi, they came to me and said, okay, do you think there's air in space in Star Wars? And I said, no. No, I don't know. And I said, well, why are you asking me that? And they explained to me, well, you remember one of the major plot points involves the need to keep the engine constantly burning. You don't have to do that in a vacuum. So why do you think they're doing that? And I thought about it and I said, I bet the Luminiferous Ether would apply to this. Because the obvious answer is that they couldn't figure out how to tell a compelling story without it. And there's some people out there saying that they couldn't figure out how to tell a compelling story with it. But we're not here to be movie critics tonight. There has to be an in-universe explanation for it. And so the idea that I had about the ether centers around this doesn't just affect this one plot point. It has to impact other things that we've seen. And it does. The theory that I'm presenting also explains why X-Wings bank when they turn, and how the Death Star could stop so easily without any apparent thrusters involved. It also changes the nature of light itself, and as with anything dealing with Star Wars, it has to interact with the Force somehow. So we're going to get to that. But first of all, I have to tell you what the Luminiferous Ether actually is. So, it's a discarded theory on the nature of light. It was very popular in the Victorian era. 1800s was kind of its heyday. In the early 1900s, it was replaced by the standard model, which includes photons. That happened, kind of around the mid-1920s. But sound. So what happened was they understood that sound wasn't a thing. It wasn't an object. It was just that you would wiggle air, and then the air would move. And then, so what you have here is kind of an aerial view of the wavelengths where all the dots are the peaks of the waves. And so they understood that sound moved in this way. But they didn't understand how light moved. And so they said, well, maybe it moves the same way. The problem with this idea is that it requires a medium. Sound has to move through something. And they knew that light moved outside of the atmosphere. So they have this, there is an understanding at the time that the atmosphere ended somewhere. That there was a point outside of Earth. All right, and this shows up even in fiction. And I kind of included two examples here just to kind of show you how widespread it was. The not particularly science-educated Edgar Allan Poe in 1835 wrote a story called The Unparalleled Adventure of One Hans Pfaall. It was a short story that appeared in a magazine. He published the first part of it. It was not well received. He never published the later part of it. We don't know if he ever actually bothered to write it. But in that story, a man travels to the moon in a hot air balloon. But Poe states that this isn't because air just goes the whole, forever. It's because the atmosphere of the Earth and the atmosphere of the moon overlap. And so if you find the right spot, you can just skip from one to the other. Jules Verne, much more scientifically educated, 30 years later, publishes From the Earth to the Moon. In this one, this Baltimore Gun Club sets up a giant gun, puts people in the bullet, and decides they're going to shoot the moon. And so his view of Americans is just amazing. But it had to be enclosed because he knew that there was no atmosphere while you're on your way to the moon. So they understood, okay, there's something outside of the atmosphere. We can see things outside of the atmosphere. The light is getting here somehow. So if there's a medium that the light moves through, It has to be something that it exists here and there. So their idea was the luminiferous ether. So it extends through all known reality, and kind of the major thing that enabled it to be tested is the idea that as the Earth moves through the ether, the observed speed of light would change. So these arrows are kind of pointing out the ether is moving this way, the wind is moving this way, and so as Earth is going into the wind, light will seem to be moving faster because we're passing each other very quickly. But as we're going across, it'll kind of stabilize, and then if we come back down and we're going along with the wind, it'll be at its slowest because we're just moving at the same speed that it is. So that's basically the idea. They said, okay, we can test this by testing the speed of light at different points throughout the year. In 1887, Michelson Morley did this experiment in Ohio. They found no discernible change in the speed of light. This was confirmed multiple times into the 1920s, kind of really put the nail in the coffin for the luminiferous ether. People understood, okay, we're not finding any evidence for this, and then stuff started to show up, like general relativity and the standard model, and this theory was available. Now, one thing to note real quick is that if you look up the luminiferous ether, and I don't tell you anything else about it, you'll notice that I'm going to say some things that don't quite sound like the Victorian idea of the luminiferous ether. And the reason for this is actually fairly simple. I'm not changing any of the fundamental nature of the ether. What I am pointing out is that for the Victorians, it was the evidence they had available suggested that the ether was not very dense, and so it didn't create much drag on material objects. But I'm going to be presenting a luminiferous ether that is very dense. The actual nature of the ether is not changed, it's just how much of it you have in a cubic meter. So, that brings us to, there's drag in space, apparently, in the Star Wars universe. So the primary danger facing the Resistance in The Last Jedi is that they don't have enough fuel to move at sublight speed away from Snoke, and Poe and company are going to run out of gas and they're all going to die. So, in the vacuum of space, as we understand it, there is no drag. So you don't have to do that. It's very simple. You get moving, you get up to speed, you keep going. As long as you don't hit anything, you'll keep going. All right? Because there's nothing pushing you back against you. So these ships are fighting against some force. There's a reason you have to keep running the engines. So when we look at this, we can see that it's not just, oh, we need to keep increasing speed. Because when you see vehicles start to run out of gas, they stop and they start to lurch to the side, and they get blown up. And so there's something working against them. It's visible that there's something working against them. And this extends into other movies. As I said, the Death Star's, the way the Death Star stops when it shows up near planets, the way that the way that nimble ships kind of steer. You know, with our space shuttle, we have these little thrusters. All those little holes are thrusters. They shoot out energy, basically. They burn fuel and they exhaust out. And that turns the space shuttle and aims them. X-Wings don't steer this way. TIE fighters don't steer this way. Nothing that we see in Star Wars steers this way. They steer the way that things in the air steer. So, clearly there's drag in space. A thick luminiferous ether explains that. But also, the other problem that they're having is that the First Order has found a way to track them through hyperspace. Which then raises the question, well, what is hyperspace? Now, it's apparently hinted at in Rogue One that this technology already existed, but they never perfected it. First Order apparently perfects it. How does the ether help us explain hyperspace? So, what we know about hyperspace so far, from the various media, is that it's roughly equivalent to like warp speed in some media, or various other faster than light speeds. It is a method of moving faster than light. It doesn't appear to have levels in Star Wars. You never hear people talking about like factors of hyperspace or going faster than each other in hyperspace. It's just kind of you enter hyperspace, you come back out of hyperspace, and then you move out. Now, this is the original visual. I'm using it because it works better with my theory than the one they're using in the new movies. But the reason that I'm pointing this out is that objects in space, objects in regular space, exist in hyperspace, right? And we have this from the very first movie. You know, Han Solo warns Luke, we need to be very careful about steering and aiming where we're going, navigating the plot, because we don't want to hit a star and die. This would be a very bad idea. So, obviously, mundane objects such as stars and planets and other ships, as we saw at the end of The Last Jedi, exist in hyperspace. Things can crash into stuff. Alright? And, I mean, this keeps coming up over and over again. In The Force Awakens, when they're talking to Han about jumping into an atmosphere. Hey, you gotta be careful, you don't hit the planet while you're in hyperspace. You know, the need for hyperspace lanes, which I'm told is explored in Solo to some degree, is all about avoiding the things that you don't want to hit. So hyperspace isn't a separate dimension. It's accessible by normal, unusual, but natural means, right? So, Star Wars Rebels introduced a species of creatures called the Purrgil, which apparently are able to enter hyperspace naturally. Alright? They, while ships require a special kind of hyperdrives, they're apparently, but apparently these hyperdrives are very small. They can fit inside an X-Wing, because we see Luke travel this way in the original series. They can fit into a one-man vessel. They don't seem to occupy a whole lot of space. They don't seem to occupy a whole lot of technology. And the energy demands don't seem to be that much greater. In fact, they seem to be more efficient than regular engines, right? Looks like X-Wing can reliably use hyperdrive basically whenever it can fly. Ships in The Last Jedi are shown to be using the same fuel from the same reserve for the hyperspace drive and for the subslight drive. And in that movie, it's explained that a single hyperspace leap would take them much farther than they can move at sublight speeds in a fraction of the time. And so it's clearly it's much more efficient. And all of the dangers of hyperspace that they explore are just dangers from going too fast. You know, it's don't smack into things, don't brush up against stuff. Whereas all of the benefits are also related to drive, speed, and drive efficiency. There's almost nothing about jumping dimensions. There's almost, you know, like in Star Trek, you'll have that random episode every couple seasons where somebody jumps into a different mirror universe or something. You don't have any of that in Star Wars because they're not doing that. I submit that the canon does claim that hyperspace is a dimension beside real space that ship slips into, but I don't think the evidence bears that out. They might think that that's what they're doing, but I don't think that that's actually what we're seeing. They don't phase through moving matter. They don't skip next to things. There's no extraordinary physical laws at play. So one of the things that we have to think about when we're trying to explore that is when we go back to Michelson and Morley. Remember that the ether has winds. It moves. It has its own lanes of travel. It has different currents, just like the ocean would, just like the air does. So, if you can hitch onto a current in the ether, right, then move, and you're moving in that direction, you can reach incredible speeds with very little fuel consumption involved. That's because the ether itself will do much of the actual propulsion. It's like a solar sail. This idea we have that we'll ride the solar wind. We'll just put out a big sail that's able to catch solar wind and we'll carry that out as far as it would take us. We have these ideas out there. And, you know, it's kind of like those things you see in airports. Like, I don't know if I strike you as the kind of man who runs, but as it happens, I don't. But I'm told that when you hurry on these things, you feel like you're flying. I mean, you just feel like you're looking down there, especially when you look at all the people like me who aren't. And the fact is, you're not doing most of the work. all the work you did was just get onto the thing and then decide whether or not you were going to walk while you were there. So, it's doing most of the work. And it's a similar concept, we're going to jump onto this thing that's already moving super fast and just ride that out. So, the other thing is that the speed of light is not constant in the luminiferous ether. As I said, there's the observed speed of light, where if you're moving against the grain or whatever, but also just the ether itself, because where you have areas where there's gusts happening, the light itself is being carried faster because it doesn't really exist, it's just moving along through that medium. It's not a wave particle in this theory, which means that the entire concept of how light works is different. Which actually helps, I realize lightsabers. Because, it's just energy. In this theory, light is just energy. So, if you can just contain, if you can just kind of close off a bit of the ether and just shoot energy into it, it'll just bounce around within that spot. It won't go anywhere. And because it's just energy and not just a photon moving around in a circle, it actually would have that increased heat and that increased power by being focused into a small area. Relativistic light, on the other hand, is very hard to contain. It doesn't really do burning much. And that, so the lightsabers end up working better. I think the ships end up working better. But the big question, always, as I mentioned with Star Wars, is what do you do with the Force? So there are, I think, a few key traits about the Force. Oh, that was the lightsaber slide. There are a few key traits about the Force that could also be said of the luminiferous ether. All right. So it flows through all of reality. It's everywhere. You can constantly access it. It connects all things. Right. It's discussed in The Last Jedi that the light side of the Force is described as this energy and life and sensation. Okay. We know that those who can access the Force can do some incredible things. They can access and discharge a great amount of energy. Right. They can. They have telekinesis. From very small things like fruit to very large things like X-Wings, right? They can move these things with their mind. They can also do very fine-tuned telekinesis, like choking the man, all right? They can sense things at a great distance, right? From world-shattering cataclysms in one movie to, personal tragedies in another. They can pick up on this information in real time from a great distance. We've also seen that they have kind of 4K ultra-high D astral projection happening, all right, at a great distance. They can maintain a conscious presence within the Force even after they've died, all right? And they can do some manipulation of the mind. We haven't seen kind of how far that can go, but we know that there's a thing that exists. Now, all of these things kind of can be explained if we allow for the ether to exist, right? So the ether, as I mentioned, flows through all of reality. It exists everywhere that light can reach. All right, it exists in relative vacuum of space, it exists in the atmosphere, it's everywhere, it's contacting everything. If we allow for the idea that we're treating the kind of energy of a human being as similar to light, which is not that unusual of an idea, right? I mean, this shows up in various cultures and various myths. It, as a Bible student, I can tell you, it shows up in the Bible. It's something that we see a lot of. It's this idea that we are connected to light in some way, that we have this energy within us that is described oftentimes as light, right? And if we just kind of run with that, then this energy could potentially be communicated through the ether, right? That would enable this energy. If you have the ability to focus, if you have the ability to connect with the ether, if you have the ability to connect with this energy, that would allow you to take that energy and project it outward. It would allow that energy to continue to exist in the Force after the body has gone. If you're able to refocus it and redirect it, that would be great output of just visible energy. And it could be used to reach out and nudge the energy present in other people. If you're able to manipulate the ether, right? And it's dense enough to cause drag on a spaceship, then it's dense enough to move things, to push them and lift them and move them around. Light being essentially energy and information, if you're tuned into the very medium of light, then you're going to have access to the kind of universe's view on what's happening around the world. You can or around the universe. You can project out these images because everything that we see is just light moving to us. If you're controlling light, you can control what people see, which would allow perfect images to be projected through the ether. Basically, in this idea, the force is just the ability to connect and manipulate a raw physical medium that exists throughout the whole Star Wars universe, that everyone already has to deal with anyway. They're already walking around it, they're already living it, they're already being impacted by it. And this ties into an existing theory that I happen to like, that views the force not as a duality, but as a depth. And I'm a big fan of this idea. Basically, people who hold to this hold that when you listen to the way that people talk about the light side and the dark side in the Star Wars universe, they're not really talking about two different things. They're talking about a thing that will consume you if you dive too much into it. They're talking about a thing that is vast, that is largely unknown, that is relatively safe to harness if you stay kind of near the shallows. That, like I said, will consume you if you dive too far into it. That the light side is basically about self-control, staying where it's safe, where you can use the force without really diving too much in, without putting yourself too much at risk. And that the dark side is about diving in, it's about throwing yourself into its currents and allowing yourself to be swept up in its power. All right, you have kind of these very powerful Sith Lords. This is Darth Nihilus. He's described as basically a wound in the Force. You have a dark Scion who's like completely consumed and torn apart and just held together with will. I mean, when you listen to some of these very powerful Sith being described, this is what they're doing. They're diving in. And so, this theory that I'm presenting ties well into this existing fan theory. Because as a physical force, the ether would have depths. It would have its own currents. It would have its own power. It would have its own directions that it's moving in. And you could just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, and the deeper you go, the harder it would be to come back. But also the ether being just the medium of light, it lends itself to light-dark imagery, right? Because everything you're dealing with when you're dealing with the ether is about, is there light moving through here? Is there not light? Where is the light going? What is it doing? Basically, the people of the Star Wars universe are trying to explain their world in the same way that we do. And, the models they have work, but they can always use refining. And as it happens, we never see the stories of scientists. We see the religious organizations and the political organizations constantly at play. And we all know that sometimes those groups don't really know what's going on. So that's the gist of the idea. I don't know exactly how close to 20 minutes I got, but if you have any ideas about this, remember that your questions, comments, and sign works must be given in the form of a question as stated by our host. Yes.
Or could it all be just narrative convenience?
Everything that we know about George Lucas says that it is. We probably did. I presented probably more world building tonight than George Lucas bothered to do before the first movie. But we are the nerds. That's what we're here for.
A real question that is also an opportunity is this something that you can use to explain them not using the word parsec right?
Ooh, that's harder.
So, So the existing kind of theory that I've always heard regarding the use of the word parsec is that it's about how close you can skirt, how short you can make the route. Because there's this great black hole on this route, on the Kessel Run, and the closer you can get to that, therefore the shorter your travel distance is, the more impressive it is, because you can get closer to the black hole without falling in. It's apparently it was confirmed in the expanded universe. Disney then throughout the expanded universe, so no one really knows. But I've also heard rumor that there was someone addressed in Solo. Like I said, I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know. But this works as well as anything else does with that explanation.
All right.
Yes.
Sorry, I have to phrase this as a question. How do Midi-Chlorians work with your theory of force?
So, I originally had a slide in here that said, "Good news, everybody," and Professor Farnsworth. And I was hoping to discredit Midi-Chlorian theory as an in-world mistake. But, as it turns out, it couldn't. And the reason is that in this idea, you have a physical medium all around you that you're always interacting with in some way. And there has to be a tool of interacting with that, right? Our eyes interact with light in the real world. This is how we receive sensation. This is how we know what's going on with light. This is how we discern it. And the issue is, do people in Star Wars universe just use their eyes to interact with the ether? Well, no, they probably don't. There's probably more complicated things at play there. And so it is possible to accept Midi-Chlorians as that Midi-Chlorians are a biological feature that enables that sensing and interacting with this natural medium that we only interact with our eyes. Yes?
So if the hyperspace is going on currents, then would that mean that you theoretically couldn't go from one place to another? You know, like you would have to be finding the current first to be able to go in that direction?
Yeah, so if we went with that, if we went with this is what hyperspace is, it's just currents in the ether, then you would have to figure out where the currents are. And the currents are going to be constantly changing as the planets are moving, the stars are moving, all this other stuff. Ships are spinning around and leaving a wake in their path. So they do explain that hyperspace navigation is ridiculously complex, right? They present it as just absurdly, difficult to figure out. And so it takes them some time to do these calculations, and they basically always have to have a computer involved. And that seemed like it would be that type of thing. Like, you got to figure out where's the jet stream right now relative to where I am.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much.